Hello and welcome to another anynode tutorial. My name is Nick DiCiaccio and we invite you to sit back and watch as we share with you a great new feature of our anynode front end, the CSV Importer. In this video, we'd like to discuss with you some practical examples of a dialed string and user directory import. You will get an insight into the structure and the individual parameters of a CSV file, as well as step-by-step instruction of the import process with the assistant. We'll also show the powerful digit manipulation possibilities. You can save a lot of time using the CSV importer as compared to inputting all of the data manually. Let's start with the dial string directories. Here we add a new dial string directory via this button in the upper part of the window, which appears when we select Dial String Directories in the tree configuration along the left side of the window. In this example, we would like to create a static directory since we want to define fixed number blocks. This selection in the wizard brings you to a page where you can enter the desired numbers, which we will import later. In the traditional way, one would add single entries via a browser such as Microsoft Edge. The wizard prompts you to enter the phone number and the display name. The entry is then added by clicking the OK button. This can be very tedious when working with very large, very long lists. The lists usually exist already in other programs, and many other programs also offer that the data can be exported as a CSV file. For example, Microsoft Excel supports a CSV export. Here, we have a sample file from a phone number directory where all the phone numbers are shown in a column along with the corresponding display name. The display name is optional. If we want to export this Excel list as a CSV file, we go to File, Export, and change the file type. We select CSV. Now the file name is automatically selected and CSV is exported as the file type. Now we save the file. This message appears only because formatting in the CSV file cannot be saved, but the pure data is still available. Let's go back to our wizard. There has been an entry, but we want to import a longer list now. In our example, there are only 5 entries, but the list can, of course, be much longer, and often is. Here you can see which data has already been read out by the wizard. We have not yet selected a file, and therefore no loaded data is displayed. We start the wizard in order to upload a file. Important, we now select the CSV file. There are other parameters that define separators in the CSV file. Excel usually uses the semicolon as a separator for the individual entries. The CSV importer tries to recognize the respective parameters of the CSV file and automatically sets them here. If it does not work, you may make changes. There is also the possibility to declare the first entry in the CSV file. When creating the CSV file, it is always important to give the columns a name. So we have the numbers here as we saw them in the Excel file and the respective values. After the import, the numbers are already visible here. Now, we only have to select the columns with the respective entries. After clicking on Next, we already see the result, which is generated from the readout data. The list would look like that we want to import. For a clearer view, I will move the window a little now. We have already created an entry in the list. Now the question, what should happen with this entry? We can now say that this import list simply replaces the old list. This means that the old list is deleted completely and only the new list is taken. Or I want to add the old list. But if I have entries with the same call number, then the entries are to be overwritten. Or a mild addition, which means if entries with the same number should already exist, they are simply ignored when adding. In our example, we simply choose the variant Replace, although it has no real effect. And now we have the directory as we want it. Then we can assign a name to this directory. In this case, we name it this, which is the German word for dial string directory. That's it. Now we start with the user directory. First, we set a directory. The static user directory is automatically created. Here we have the previous entries, which are still empty. In the usual case, you would add an entry again. In our example, we assume that we have 6 locations, or 6 branches, in the German cities of Hamburg, Munich, Wolfsburg, 2 in Berlin, and 1 branch in Dortmund. Each location is a user with 2 numbers, which can register and then is reachable on those numbers. By default, we would start with an entry, for example, with Hamburg. We also want the users to authenticate. The extension there would be 201. We define this also as the SIP username. We enter the password here. Afterwards, here we would have to enter the numbers under which the location can register and under which it can be reached. In our example, we want 2 phone numbers, one internal and one external. In the wizard, you can enter only 1 number. As mentioned here, we can also go back to the name page. Here, we activate the advanced mode of the wizard. This makes the authentication page look exactly the same, but the page for the registration looks slightly larger. There, we can now specify a whole list of call numbers or even more complex settings, but this is not necessary for our example. For our example, the location Hamburg has 201 as the internal call number, and for the external call number, plus 49401 23401. Under these 2 phone numbers, the location is able to register. We also want to add custom individual manipulations, which means we want to have incoming and outgoing digit manipulations for the SIP messages here. We look at the standard case. For the incoming manipulation, we take the prefix suffix manipulation behavior. So we can define this as a filter as to how the phone number must begin and how it must end. In our case, let's say if it ends at 123401, then 6 characters are deleted from the back of the trailing number. However, we want to delete the whole number. This means we can delete 11 characters, because the whole number will have 11 characters, but for security we enter it with even more characters, so that the whole number is deleted and is replaced by 201. We make the same for outgoing manipulation. Here, we take the wildcard pattern option so that you can see both cases in the assistant. There, we now put a filter on the 201 number. We say it should delete all characters and the actual call number should be converted from it. We would have completed an entry. This is a lot of work if you enter numbers individually that differ only slightly. We can already clone the entry and would only have to change the differences. But as a second method, we now have the option of importing the CSV file, the method we want to use now. We have just seen the fields needed. We have prepared this in an Excel spreadsheet. The first column shows the location. It is important here that the location is always clearly marked. Every user in the anynode front end always has a unique username, and that is the location for us. This means that for the Berlin location, we have to number it since we have 2 of them. For authentication, we select the respective internal dial-up of the location. The password is also stored here. If you do not want to store the passwords in the Excel file, it is also possible to configure the importer so that the password is not imported, but this would have to be entered separately. These are the phone numbers under which the location registers or is accessible. In this case, 2 numbers. It is important that these are separated by a comma, but you could also enter 3, 4, or 10 numbers. And for each user, we have a manipulation rule for the incoming direction and for the outgoing direction. We have seen the prefix-suffix manipulation. That means you want to set a filter so that the number is a certain prefix or suffix, i.e., it must begin or end with something. Then you can say how many characters are to be cut off at the beginning and at the end. And then you can define how much to add to the number, either to the beginning or to the end. In our case, this means that we have a total of 6 parameters for the prefix-suffix manipulation. The first parameter is how the number has to start. In this case, we do not want to match the phone number, so the space remains and we start with the comma. The second entry says how the number must end. In this case, we want the number to end at 123411 or 01, so that the filter can be accessed here. We want to delete digits at the beginning, 11 digits, as this makes up the whole number. We could enter 20 for security reasons, so we can be sure that the entire number will be deleted, because in this case we want to replace the whole number, for example by 101 or 301. For the outgoing direction, we want wildcard pattern manipulation. This is pretty much the same. It is just a wildcard pattern instead of the prefix and suffix filter, which means that a direct match must take place. Here we want to directly match 101. Then we have the same procedure again. How many characters we want to remove at the beginning and the end, and which characters we want to add to the beginning or end. This file is created in Excel and we would like to export it as a CSV file. And now we start our import wizard. Here are similarities to the other import wizard, as all of them have the same structure. On the first page, there is always the currently imported data. As with the last import, we have not entered any data, so this page is still empty. So we start uploading our table. Again, you can change the parameters if they are not recognized correctly. But in our case, everything was correctly recognized, as one can see here. Then you pick the individual columns. For the username, we had already said that we would take the location description. In our case, Berlin 1 or 2, Hamburg, Dortmund, and so on. For authorization, the data can be found in the column AOR for the SIP username and in the column password for the password. In order to identify the locations with the corresponding telephone numbers under which they can be contacted, we can specify a column with the telephone numbers. This column we have called telephones. For the incoming and outgoing manipulations, we can also specify a list. In this case, we have one list for each. With the Add button, we add a list. For the incoming manipulations, we use the prefix and suffix manipulation, which is located in the incoming manipulation prefix-suffix column. For the outgoing manipulation, we use one rule for the wildcard pattern. And this column is called the outgoing manipulation wildcard. You can now display the intermediate result. At this point, the number of users created with this wizard is now displayed. We have 6 users. This also fits exactly with the expected entries. Here you can see the names of the locations: Berlin 1, Berlin 2, Dortmund, Hamburg, Wolfsburg. With a mouse over, you can also get detailed information about the respective users and can check if they have been recognized correctly. If everything is okay so far, there is the same query as in the other wizard as well. However, this query only occurs if there are entries in the original list. We have already created a list here. So the question is, what should happen with the old entry? In this case, we want to overwrite the old entries and therefore choose Replace. And already the data is all imported, and you can look at it here. This is the end of the video. I hope I conveyed how useful and helpful the CSV importer is. For any kind of feedback or suggestions for improvement, please contact us. And we thank you.